Next on Pennsylvania Newsmakers, it's down to the wire on a state budget in Harrisburg. Will it pass on time? And what's at stake for Pennsylvanians? We'll discuss in our Reporter Roundtable. But first, a closer look at economic development priorities in the Keystone State with the leader of Team Pennsylvania. That's coming up next on Pennsylvania Newsmakers.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host.
Hello, I'm Steve Aaron, this week's guest host on Pennsylvania Newsmakers. From Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, from the Lehigh Valley to Erie, from Scranton to Johnstown, and all points in between, the economic health of Pennsylvania depends on job growth and private investment, sound public policy, and a strong tax base. Much of that is the purview of Team Pennsylvania, which is designed to accelerate economic growth all across Pennsylvania through public-private partnerships. And I am delighted to be joined today by the CEO of Team Pennsylvania, Abby Smith. Good to see you, Abby. Welcome.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Great to have you here. So as I think back, I was privileged to work in the Ridge administration for Governor Ridge many, many years ago, and that was the birth of Team Pennsylvania. Can you tell us a little bit about Team PA, what it is, and its work in Pennsylvania?
Sure, I'm happy to. You're right. It was founded in 1997 under the Ridge administration, and it was really this idea that government needs a place to work with business, and business needs a place to work with government. And I think what's been great is we've seen and worked with 6 different gubernatorial administrations right now. We're a nonpartisan organization, though, so we work across Republicans, Democrat administrations. But really, it's this idea that we need places to come together, and that has remained true. And that is really toward this health of Pennsylvania's economy. We think of ourselves as long-term stewards of Pennsylvania's economy. A lot of what happens in Harrisburg takes place in 2, 4, 6-year cycles. And so the fact that we can play that long game is really important for the health of Pennsylvania.
I think most Pennsylvanians are certainly familiar with chambers of commerce, whether they're local in their community or a statewide chamber of commerce, which play very important roles. How would you describe the difference between Team Pennsylvania and a chamber of commerce that some people might be familiar with?
So they're definitely linked in lots of ways, but chambers are really focused on specifically the health of the business community. And while the health of the business community is part of Pennsylvania's economy, we really are taking a full view. What sets us apart, I think, is how we sit around that table. So it's actual public sector leaders, leaders of business and industry, leaders of academia, nonprofit organizations, organized labor. And so there's a cross-section of Pennsylvania's economy that goes beyond just the business community, although business and industry is really core to that. So we're really looking at all of the different ways that Pennsylvania's economy works and all of the different contributors to the overall economic health.
Obviously, the public discourse was very different in 1997 when Team Pennsylvania started. We've got civility is changed a little bit. I think we all wish there was more civility in our politics right now, in our government. How is that only, do you think, raise the profile and raise the need of Team Pennsylvania?
Without a doubt. I do like to say, though, that I think we focus a lot on how we're all divided, how separate we all feel. And I think that a lot of it is that we don't have a lot of spaces to be connected, which is a different way of framing it and looking at it. A lot of the work we do, it's focused on the key drivers in Pennsylvania's economy, so energy and agriculture and manufacturing, life sciences, robotics and technology. But there may be very different players with very different perspectives on how that work gets done. What we try to do, not just with our board, but in the work that we do, is we're really bringing people around a shared table. We're not necessarily seeking consensus. The focus is on how we actually sit down with one another, how we actually say what are the key things we need to contend with, and also what do we want to see for our community, for the vitality of our community. And I find that there's a lot more areas, not just of common ground, but of common vision. And so I think when we set those tables, we find that it's a lot harder to hate up close. And so, I think this is a time when a lot takes place in these very partisan conversations. And we like to think that a lot is going to get done outside of the partisan fray.
When you have such a diverse state with major cities on the east and the west, other larger cities across, but also we're so agriculturally driven and very much a rural state, how do you make priorities on what areas to focus on to satisfy such a large and diverse state?
It's a really good question. I think sometimes we see things that in particular pockets of Pennsylvania, robotics and tech, life sciences are good examples where we think of them happening in those urban areas much more. For us, part of taking the full breadth of view of the state, it actually makes us think, okay, how is this not going to be a regional play? What does it look like to have inclusive economic growth? So life sciences is a thriving industry in Philadelphia, in Pittsburgh. But when we look at the potential for the full value chain of life sciences, we think about packaging, manufacturing, distribution, transportation, plastics, all of these areas that Pennsylvania is strong in different corners of the state. And so this is where we want that regional play to become a statewide play. And so I think there's actually a lot we think of when those different areas intersect with one another, and we take the strengths in different regions and think, how can they actually work together, as opposed to thinking of them as siloed efforts across the state.
Well, that's a great place to take a break, and we'll continue our conversation and focus on what some of those priorities are right now. We're going to continue our conversation with Abby Smith, the CEO of Team Pennsylvania, right after this.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
And welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. We're continuing our conversation with Abby Smith, the leader of Team Pennsylvania. Abby, I want to pick up where we left off. We were talking about all the different opportunities across Pennsylvania. Let's talk about where Pennsylvania is uniquely positioned to lead right now. What are some of those areas?
I can't help but immediately go to energy. Pennsylvania, by a lot of different counts, is the #2 state for energy, and #2 energy exporter, #2 for natural gas. You name it, we're really a powerhouse when it comes to energy. And we provide a lot of the energy for our region, which is a tremendous role and responsibility that we play.
What role do you see for nuclear in that? You know,
Yes.
There's been a lot of a sudden resurgence.
That's right. Well, and I think that part of it is that nuclear is the kind of thing where Pennsylvania has actually been a key player for a very long time. We're talking decades of leadership, and it's actually hard to build up leadership within nuclear because it's so highly specialized, everything from the workforce to the materials to the manufacturing, and Pennsylvania has stood as a major leader for that. We've got Westinghouse on the western side of the state. We've got Constellation that has major growth within the state. There's a lot of nuclear leadership and a lot of news that's been happening within the nuclear space. We're really excited about what's possible for the future as well. And so when we think about where that could go, number one, without a doubt, the way that our academic institutions, along with manufacturing and the generation of nuclear, we think that Pennsylvania has a lot of upside potential. We know that demand is going to continue to increase, and I can talk about that in a little bit as well. And we have to look around and say, where is that going to come from? And without a doubt, when we look at different possibilities, we know that nuclear is going to be a key part of that. And number two, because Pennsylvania already has a lot of that infrastructure in place, our potential for growth, we get to start at a much higher place than another place that, say, wants to begin their strength in nuclear. So for us, we're really well positioned to have that right to win.
I also don't want to forget, we talked about Pennsylvania being a lead agriculture state. You have a focus on hardwoods, right, and our forests, right? We're so fortunate to have beautiful forests across Pennsylvania and the industry that's tied into that. Talk a little bit about Team Pennsylvania's focus on hardwoods.
I'm happy to. A lot of our state, we don't think of it. It's not the first thing we go to unless you're in these communities, but over 50% of the state is forested. And when we think about it, we sometimes don't realize that globally, we are actually a world-renowned state when it comes to our hardwoods and our forestries. So when we look at that and we look at the potential for markets, what happens? A lot of consumer preferences have really shifted. Look no further than your own home to know that not everything is made out of wood in the same way that it used to be. That used to be the standard. And so a lot of those markets are internationally, and there's, I would say, a lot of uncertainty right now about global markets when that's your primary driver for growth. So the way we're looking at it is, in addition to our forestry opportunities, we also think about forest health. And strong forests are also young forests. So we think about how these opportunities excuse me, for economic growth are directly tied also to the health of our forests and our conservation efforts. This is the kind of thing where you do need a lot of partners around the table. These are not going to be solutions that happen with one little individual operation after another. And also, we're talking about the part of Pennsylvania that is perhaps most geographically dispersed. You have different operations in different corners. So our ability to work together to unlock some of the potential, to unlock new market opportunities, and to also have a future for our forestry, our hardwoods, but also other low-grade wood products, and making the economics of that industry work well is going to require collaboration, require kind of working in a pre-competitiveness space so that everybody can have that rising tide lift all ships.
Governor Ridge always used to like to say, we make stuff in Pennsylvania. And we do. I think people forget about the diversity of the state and all that we have to offer.
Really
Abby, I think we're out of time, but I really appreciate you being with us and talking about Team Pennsylvania. We'll have to have you back sometime.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it, Steve.
Thank you. Well, up next, there are just days left to get a new state budget done. We will have a discussion with our reporter roundtable on the latest news out of our state capital. Up next on Pennsylvania Newsmakers.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. It's time for our reporter roundtable. Pleased to be joined by Marc Levy, longtime Associated Press Capitol Bureau reporter here in Harrisburg, and also Kara Jeffers with Lilly Broadcasting. Great to have you on Pennsylvania Newsmakers.
Thanks for having me.
So this is the time of year we're all familiar with. We're coming down to the end of June. Do we get a state budget done? Marc, what's your prediction? Where are we right now? And do you think we're going to see something before the June 30th deadline?
Well, I'm not in the prediction business, but we were told this past week by the Senate Majority Leader Joe Pittman that the budget will not be done on June 30th, which is essentially the statutory deadline. On July 1st, the state starts losing some of its spending authority, but it's weeks before you'll feel any impact on services. So there is a grace period there for them to get the deal done in July, but Senator Pittman was clear that just not enough has been done. Not enough hard decisions have been made at this point in the process for that deal to get done by July 1st. So
we have divided government, right? We've got a Democrat-controlled House, a Republican-controlled Senate, a Democrat governor, which can lead to things grinding. Some of the things you hear, though, things seem like they're going particularly slowly this year as compared to previous years. Kara, what's your sense of where we are and the ability for this deal to get done, even if it's well into July?
I feel like we have the Democrats in the House, Republicans in the Senate. This is like year 3 that they're negotiating this. So everyone's kind of getting along a little bit better. They're more used to each other. But those philosophical differences remain very deep and haven't changed. Hearing from Senator Pittman yesterday, he's really saying they have issues with Medicaid. How much are we going to spend there? And then coming down to skill games is something they're still trying to figure out. And underneath both of those things is really this idea of how much are we going to spend as a state? And that's where often Democrats and Republicans have a hard time coming together on that issue.
I also understand there's a kind of a debate over the use of the rainy day fund, and I think there's a little close to $2 billion perhaps in there. It sounds like Governor Shapiro's eager to maybe perhaps tap into that to use. The Republicans are a little more hesitant. Mark, what's the latest on that, and how big of a factor is that rainy day fund?
Right. So Pennsylvania is a deficit state. It's been that way for a long time. Slow-growing population, fast-growing elderly population that's expensive to take care of, and the number of tax-paying wage earners is shrinking. So it's in a difficult position. The budget that the governor has proposed rests on about $4.5 billion in surplus money. If that gets spent, there'd be about $6 billion left in reserve. The rainy day fund is part of that. But Republicans make the point that if we're going to keep spending $4 billion from reserves, in a couple of years there will be no reserves. And the reserves are important for if there is some sort of economic calamity. It's important for the state's credit rating to have lower interest rates, to be able to borrow more cheaply and refinance more cheaply. And what they're saying is that the governor has proposed a budget that is simply unsustainable. And if it continues, it'll require a massive tax increase to keep balancing in the out years. So Kara makes a great point that we have 3 years of these teams being in place, these leadership teams being in place. They know how to work with each other, but they have deep philosophical differences, and Republicans are having heartburn over the size of the deficit spending that the governor's proposing.
Excellent. Let's take a pause here. We'll continue our conversation with Reporter Roundtable on Pennsylvania Newsmakers right after this.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania American Water. We keep life flowing across the Keystone State.
We're continuing our conversation with Marc Levy from the Associated Press and Kara Jeffers from Lilly Broadcasting. Kara, let's talk a little bit about the proposal to legalize adult use marijuana. This was a priority in Governor Shapiro's budget address. He spoke about it at some length. Where does that stand right now? Does that have a chance of getting done?
According to Senate Republicans, that's really been off the table. House Democrats did pass a bill on this back in May. Again, this is addressing if we have a structural deficit in our budget, you can either spend less or make more money. Pennsylvania has a robust medical cannabis system. We're trying to add that recreational side to it because that's something that could be taxed more. However, the bill that House Democrats sent over to the Senate, it proposed a kind of state-run system for what we have with our fine wine and good spirits liquor stores. Cannabis would just kind of be sold in that same space. There wouldn't be any private market for the sale of it. And there's lots either in the House and in the Senate who were like, we don't like that idea. So even though it passed the House, it was somewhat dead on arrival in the Senate. Senator Laughlin, who is in favor of cannabis, really said, hey, I don't like the state system. He brought it for a vote in his committee and it got voted down. We haven't had anything introduced since then. So not high chance.
Mark, do you think this becomes a negotiating point for getting a budget done? Is it that much of a priority, you think, for the governor that becomes a tool he's using as far as getting a budget over a goal line?
It's hard to envision that simply because there are a lot of Senate Republicans that don't want to vote for any legalization bill. As I understand it, that could change, I guess. Things get horse traded in the late days of June, but the urgency behind passing it is the concept there is to raise hundreds of millions of dollars from licensing fees and to sort of prop up spending. At this point, you have to ask yourself whether any of that would really happen in this fiscal year, even if it gets done. But you are setting up a very complicated regulatory system in this bill, and the sides on it, even the sides that are in favor of it, are far apart. So it's hard to envision it getting done.
So let's pivot from cannabis to steel. That's quite a pivot. President Trump this week approved the historic merger partnership between Nippon Steel out of Japan and U.S. Steel in Pittsburgh. Mark, this has long been discussed. What's your take on how this finally came down, and a huge impact, obviously, on the western part of Pennsylvania?
Yeah, it's a huge impact on the steel industry. This is a deal that's been in the works for a year and a half, maybe even longer, when, almost 2 years ago, U.S. Steel took an unsolicited bid from Cleveland-Cliffs for it in the $10 billion range. And then once it became clear that U.S. Steel was open to bids, Nippon Steel came in with an almost $15 billion bid for it. And that got sucked up into presidential politics. We happen to be in a premier battleground state. And you had Donald Trump and Joe Biden from the campaign trail saying that they would oppose this deal and they would use their presidential powers to block this kind of foreign investment in a company that's crucial to national security. Well, Trump gets elected and starts entertaining the idea of what he called a partnership. It's really a Nippon Steel takeover. They have bought out U.S. Steel, and they will keep the name of U.S. Steel. They'll keep it in Pittsburgh, but they upped their investment in it. So they're going to invest north of $10 billion in U.S. Steel facilities, which have been underinvested in. Every analyst will tell you that. And in the short term, it will keep U.S. Steel solvent. The Japanese have some of the best technology in steelmaking in the world, and so U.S. Steel will benefit from that, and the Japanese will benefit from having access to a very vibrant steel market in the United States. That's been helped by tariffs under both Biden and Trump, and the deal is just freshly done after months and months and months of uncertainty.
So that's big news in the western half of the state. Kara, I did want to pivot just quickly back to the east and SEPTA, which is the transit system in Philadelphia, which is having some significant financial issues. But there was this week a transportation bill, a transit bill that got through the House. Can you tell us a little bit about that and the implications there?
Yeah. Public transit has been one of the biggest conversation topics this year. There is mass transit, public transit in all 67 counties. However, obviously Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, both big cities, congested areas, really benefit from having those trains and bus routes. They have been struggling fiscally since before COVID, but then the pandemic definitely did a number on their finances. Lots of Democrats really pushing, saying, hey, we need these transit systems to be robust, not just for our day-to-day use, but in 2026, we have the World Cup. We're celebrating America's 250th birthday. There's an NFL draft coming. So they really want that robust transit system ready for that. Republicans, many in more of these rural counties, are like, hey, why should we send so much money to these just like very localized places when we have plenty of roads, plenty of bridges that also need that financial support? So that's a question of, will transit get any funding this year? Republicans and Democrats kind of agreeing, like, if it's going to happen, it takes funding also for those roads and bridges.
Got it. Well, we're going to leave that as the last word. Thank you both so much for joining us. Appreciate it. Always great to have your insights. That's it for this week's edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. Thanks so much for joining us. Take care.